A lot of people have told me out of all the themes we use in this show, because we have different miniseries, of course, so there's different themes for each, the FDNY one, the Bomb Squad one, the ESU one, so on and so forth. They love that one. Somebody compared it to lowering down the lights at night and smooth talking your old lady, which made me laugh. But listen, there's better, there's worse compliments to be paid, I suppose. Excuse me. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 249 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. If you haven't checked out episode 248, that was volume 38 of the Best, the Bravest, my FDNY miniseries, interviews with the FDNY's elite, with Paul Rogers, who started as a cop, did 8 years in the 13th precinct, and then in 1993 rolled over into the FDNY, where he did the last 25 years of his civil service career. Eventually got to hazmat, where he was a lieutenant. So good talking with him. It'll be good talking to my next guest tonight. He'll get introduced in a moment, but first, as you know, we're going to roll through our sponsors very quickly. First things first, of course, my consulting company.
Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company.
Indeed, getting that off the ground, and things are going well so far. So please, of course, if you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so. The next sponsor's in the chat. He's the co-executive creator and producer of Tales from the Boom Room, another miniseries in the show, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. Every time I call him, he's hard at work. And that's Bill Ryan of the Ryan Investigative Group.
The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast.
Bill's the great people, and so is my next guest, our last sponsor of the bunch, but he's certainly not the least, of course, in importance. Former NYPD officer turned criminal defense attorney and former guest of this show, Joe Murray.
If you're ever caught on the wrong end of the law, call Joe Murray. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer turned criminal defense attorney. With 15 years of experience in the NYPD from 1987 until 2002, he parlayed a successful career in the NYPD into an equally successful career as a criminal defense attorney. His website is jmurray-law.com, where you can reach him at 646-838-1702, or just email him at joe@jmurray-law.com.
All right, that takes care of the sponsors. Thanks to Bill and Joe for their support of the program. Now to my next guest, who for a large portion of his 20-year career in the NYPD served as an investigator, both as a detective originally, and then he made sergeant and was promoted. He worked major with a capital M cases stemming from the drug trade to Joint Terrorism Task Force enforcing counterterrorism measures after 9/11. Also did some time in Narcotics, the Organized Crime Investigation Division, the Major Case Squad, and of course, as I mentioned before, JTTF. He retired in 2004. He's still been very active since then in the private sector, and he's currently one half of the very popular and immediately successful, they're only 25 episodes in, they're doing great, as we'll talk about tonight, Gold Shields podcast, which I love listening to. It's Tom Smith, and of course, tonight's guest, retired NYPD Sergeant Dan Murphy. Dan, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be on a show that's, you've had so many well-known people on this show. It's really an honor to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Always love talking to my NYPD and FDNY folks. And thanks to everybody who's tuning into the chat tonight. I'll shout you out when we can. Of course, you guys know the super chat's there. If you want to put something in there, we'd greatly appreciate it. So you've mentioned on Gold Shields growing up in Queens, 38th Street?
Yes, in Greenpoint Avenue.
Tell me about that.
Well, 38th Street and Greenpoint Avenue at the time. I think it's probably changing a little bit now, but very much a blue-collar neighborhood. You know, I was Irish Catholic kid growing up, going to St. Raphael School. I was an altar boy, played in the schoolyard. I didn't know what a grass field looked like for the most part. None of us did, but But it was really an interesting upbringing. It was good. It was everybody worked hard in our neighborhood, and there's a lot of kids around. There was always something to do. It was interesting. I grew up on the subways. My father worked for the transit authority, so I was very at home on the subways and buses of the city, even as a young kid. And I wouldn't trade it. I learned a lot. It was great.
Oh, there's very few childhoods like growing up in New York City, and I often kid my mom. I'm like, you couldn't, because I'm based in Connecticut, as you know, you couldn't have had me 2 hours to the north. You had to have me here. And I love Connecticut, but having family down the city's just awesome. And anytime I get the chance to peel down there, believe me, I do. So growing up, of course, with your dad working for the transit authority, you see him as a blue collar guy. You see the work he's putting in. Where did the desire to go into civil service come from?
I really don't think I had it growing up necessarily, but when I was getting out of high school, I went to St. Francis Prep, very good high school. And when I was getting out of there, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, what I wanted to study, what I was going to do. I wanted to go into Marine Corps. My father had been a Marine for 8 years and was a Korean War veteran. And he told me, no, go to school. He didn't have any opportunities. He only got his GED when he was probably in his upper 20s. After his Marine Corps service, he went back to get his GED. So he said, go to school, go to college. I said, all right, great. You're going to pay for it? He said, no, I don't have any money, but you can stay in that little bedroom there and you can go to school and work. So I did that, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I was a communications major for a couple of years at Queens College. And then I remember talking to my uncle, who had been with the NYPD for a long time. He ended up doing about 38 years before he retired. And we were at a family barbecue, and I was telling him my situation. I wasn't quite sure. I was at a crossroads. I had finished 2 years at Queens College, wasn't sure if communications was for me, realized I had a Queens accent. It wasn't going to work most places. So broadcasting wasn't necessarily my future. But what I did say to him was, I'm not sure what I want to do. I don't necessarily want to sit in an office all day long. I'm 20 years old, and I want some adventure. I want some excitement. So he said, take the police test. It's coming up. I said, really? I hadn't really thought about it all that much. So I started thinking about it. I said, you're outside, but you can be in a car. You'll get some excitement. New York City, I grew up in it. It was always busy, always something going on, always, crime all around. Took the test and did very well. As a matter of fact, about a year after taking the test, I was hired. And I didn't look back. It was great. I really didn't give it a lot of thought, except where I grew up, a civil service job like that with steady pay and pension and benefits was a really good thing. You had kind of arrived. You could count on a livelihood, and I loved it. Actually, it fit me to a T.
Oh, of course, as you've talked about on Gold Shields, and as we'll talk about tonight, our guest is retired NYPD Sergeant Dan Murphy, who, like I said earlier, is one half of the Gold Shields podcast. Hello to everyone in the chat. I'll try to shout you out, and if I miss you, don't get mad at me. This is why I don't do shout-outs, because I'm always afraid I will. Billy Ryan, I shouted you out earlier. Joe Maliga, retired correctional officer up in Rochester. Darren DeFries is here. Jay Driscoll from across the pond in England. Dawn Marie's here as well. Howard Blank, retired out of Taru, is here watching via LinkedIn. And Mike Thomas and Gold Shields, Tom Smith, he's watching tonight. That's my partner, he says. So good to see you, Tom. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And Tom will be on the show hopefully soon. I sent you a date via email, Tom, so when you can confirm that for me so I can get the other half of Gold Shields on.
That's right.
So coming on to the job in 83, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 83, 84, you knew the subway system well, so you knew the transit police. Let's say, I don't know how well you knew about housing, but you definitely knew transit. Let's say the NYPD didn't call you. If transit did, would you still have come on the job?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was very familiar with the subway system. It wouldn't have been the biggest thing to me. I would have taken it in a heartbeat.
Okay. Yeah. And a lot of people ended up loving it, at least pre-merger. They ended up, same thing with housing, as I've covered many a time on the program. They grew to love those respective police departments and, they came and added a lot to the NYPD once the merge happened in 1995. So NSUs, by the end of the 80s, they were gone. By the beginning of the 90s, it had changed, but they were still around when you came on the job. Absolutely. Where was your first NSU located?
My NSU was 15, based out of the 90 precinct in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. We also covered the 8-3, which was Bushwick, and the 9-4, which was Greenpoint. We spent very little time in Greenpoint. It was pretty much 9-0 and 8-3. Lots of stuff going on back then, a lot. Real old school policing was still in effect there. The stuff that was on our belt, I wouldn't recognize the new stuff nowadays because we were so primitive in terms of equipment, and so much of it was just, we learned from our training officers who were really veterans and experienced and had lived through some very interesting and turbulent times in the city in the 60s and 70s. So it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Of course, and as I mentioned before, for both my FDNY and NYPD interviews, a lot of the firemen and cops on the job at that time with seniority also had that military background too. So you got that added training. If they had been in Vietnam or in other wars, they're
Right.
also bringing that military mindset to the police and the fire department, already a paramilitary organization. So you're getting even more knowledge and you're becoming even more squared away just by osmosis. Even if they're not telling you something directly, just by watching them and being around them, you're picking up some good stuff.
Yeah, I was picking up a lot of things, not the least of which was survival, how to survive as a cop in a busy area. And, not to make it overly dramatic, but some of these training officers had been in multiple shootouts. They had worked during the days when the Black Liberation Army was assassinating cops. They had worked during the anti-Vietnam protests that became riots. They had seen the blackout in Brooklyn, specifically the area I was working in was probably the hardest hit in the city by the 1977 blackout, which left an impact on the whole city, but it really devastated. As a matter of fact, 1984, 7 years after it, as I'm a rookie there, a good percentage of the businesses along Broadway underneath the L in that section of Brooklyn still hadn't recovered. They were still shuttered. So these guys went through a lot and really did teach you a lot of lessons on how to be smart and how to stay out of trouble and stay out of the morgue, which was two of the biggest goals every night, do the job, get it done right, and go home. Mm-hmm.
Of course, Patrick Pogan's in the chat. Shout out to you. Of course, Patrick retired out of Joint Terrorism Task Force, I believe, as well. But he was also a longtime member of the NYPD Emergency Service Unit, mostly in truck too. So good to see you, Patty. Hope you're feeling better, by the way. I know he was under the weather recently. So, and you mentioned it during that time. If you go on the Officer Down Memorial page and you look up the NYPD's history of line of duty deaths, during the 80s, it was constant, and just focusing on the NYPD alone, not even counting the transit cops who were killed or, of course, the housing cops who were killed. And the common theme was you had a couple that perished in auto accidents, a couple that perished from vehicular assault. Most of it was gunfire. There was a lot of guns on the street. And unfortunately, Dan, as you know, a lot of criminals that weren't afraid to use them against cops.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. We went out there with our 10-layer Kevlar vests, our 6-round Smith & Wesson revolvers, and 2 ammo pouches that were hard plastic. And if you opened them, they basically spilled your rounds into the street. So it really was more guts than brains, we'll say, in many ways. We were ill prepared for some of the stuff we were coming up against. And as a result, a slew of officers during the 80s were killed. Scott Goodell, terrible, terrible cases because they were not equipped to deal with what we were coming up. And it was not uncommon to make arrests, or you're working in a busy precinct, you'd see an arrest on a given night that would be a machine gun or a street sweeper or multiple 9mm or 45s. I mean, we were outgunned. It was a tough time.
Yeah, it was well before the 9mm came into effect in the 90s. During this time, and this is why I wanted to, I love speaking with police officers that came on to the NYPD during the 70s or during the 80s, because it's such a fine line to walk between being a soldier, because look at how the city was back then. You had to have that warrior spirit and warrior mentality, but also being a caretaker. There are plenty of good people in these communities you're working in that want you to be there, that appreciate you being there, even if they don't say it. It's not like you're in a battlefield in a Vietnam type situation where you have to think one way and that's the way all the time. A cop has many different balancing acts that he or she has to contend with during their career, especially if they're working in a high crime area. What was the key for you to having that balance between being a tough street cop, but also not forgetting who you're doing the job for, the fact that not everyone in this territory is your enemy?
Well, one of the things you always have to realize is that, as a civil servant, you basically are there to serve the public. It's not about you. So go out and serve the public and do your job. And there are a lot of great people, even in high crime areas, that are just trying to hang on. And a lot of them will come up to you and say something, hi, officer, whatever, but a lot won't, because they're afraid of repercussions within their neighborhood. To me, it really wasn't that difficult to tell who was up to no good and who was working. For example, on a Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, if you're standing on a corner and you're an able-bodied man and just standing there with 3 of your friends, the chances are good you're up to no good. That same person who's still there at midnight is up to no good. People that are getting off the bus from their jobs and hustling their kids places, those are the people you want to look out for. You're not going to come into contact with them all that often. So yes, we did have to be aggressive. And I was taught by old timers that if you had a foot post, let's say, that's your post, you own that street. And anybody who's on that street's there because you let them be there. And if you get to the point where you're timid or you won't do that, you'll regret it. And the next cop out will regret it. You have got to take control of the street and let the message be sent that I'm here, I'm on duty, and I'm in charge, period.
Yeah.
Problem with that, come see me.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times people responded to that, but you had to set up a situation of respect. They had to respect you. And even if it was just they feared you, they had to know that you're there and they better do whatever they're doing someplace else. And it's something that I don't know that the cops nowadays can do, because the job has changed, the expectations, the visibility, cameras everywhere. But we were not afraid to walk up to people and say, get off my corner. You're on my corner. I'm not doing anything wrong. Yeah, you are. This is a narcotics prone area. You're standing on the corner doing nothing. And I'm standing here and it's disrespectful. Get off my corner. And a lot of times it got to be shoving matches or screaming matches, or the person would get arrested for disorderly conduct. But you had to let the message be sent to the neighborhood. If I'm going to be here, get off my corner. And it sounds simple, but it really was a territory or a turf game.
No, it had to be back then. And if you do that now, you're right. Look what happens.
Oh, yeah.
You. Can I get your badge number? Can I get your badge number? And it becomes a whole to-do to where, like you said, the game has changed. And it's unfortunate because it essentially neuters the officer. Mm-hmm. And back then, even if crime was still going out of control, collars still mattered. Arrest still mattered. Did the mentality change down the road, as you recently talked about with Commissioner Brad on an episode of Gold Shields? Yes, it became more prevention, as we'll discuss later. But at that time, listen, cuffs being slapped on for those that are innocent in the neighborhood, that's never a bad sight, never a bad sound to hear.
No, you're right. And it was, I remember coming out with the attitude of wanting to be active. First of all, the job was exciting. When I was 21 and I came on it, and all of a sudden, after 6 months of training, I'm plopped into a neighborhood not far from where I grew up, but different in many ways. There's a lot more going on, a lot more open drugs. You could walk down the street and step on the works, the hypodermic needles. There was glassine envelopes from heroin everywhere, junkies hanging out everywhere. And by later in the night, they'd be wandering the street like this. And, and that just brings up all different types of problems. Burglaries and robberies and stuff naturally follow the need for the next hit. So you're out there and, if your eyes and ears are open and your head's on a swivel, you can make good arrests. And I decided I was going to be active and learn the system and learn how to make arrests. And it was a great experience. I was glad I went where I went because I saw a lot of stuff, and the training officers were very experienced. It was nice to have them.
Now, before I continue with my questioning, and we're talking with Dan Murphy here in the Mike the New Haven podcast, retired NYPD Sergeant, did you go to the 3-0 in Harlem before making Sergeant, or was that after?
Before. That was my first permanent command. After I left NSU 15 in Brooklyn, I was sent with a group of way too many of us to the 2-0 precinct on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And somebody at the borough took a look after a few weeks and said, we sent how many cops to the 2-0? Why did we do that? So they shipped about 20 of us up to the 3-0, where we were more needed, frankly. And I was there from 85 into 86. Just a regular patrol cop, learning my way.
Right around those Grand Plymouth Furies,
it was better than walking, that's for sure. Yeah.
No, those were good police cars.
A day and a half,
No, of course. And so let's spend a little bit of time on that year. It's Harlem. It's the 80s. The drug trade is running wild. Tell me about some of the more unique nights, shall we say, on patrol.
Sure. I mean, the 3-0 at the time, when I first got there, was a busy enough command. But then about 2/3 of the way through my stay there, around the summertime of 1985, crack hit. And crack hit hard and heavy in the 3-0 precinct. And I remember the first time I saw it, I didn't know what it was. Most of us were like, what is that? And somebody said, well, based upon the fact that I'm holding a bag of it and I'm holding the guy that was just holding it and he can't wait to get away, it's got to be illegal. So we grabbed him. You cuff him up. And at that time, they were so brazen about it. I remember the first guy I grabbed with it probably had 300 vials in his pocket, in this big bag. He was like he was giving out candy. And there was so much money involved with it. But what crack did is it took the violence level and it sent it through the roof. Because not only are the crackheads desperate in a short period of time for money for the next fix and will do almost anything. I've seen them put their hands through windows and rip open their veins to grab a purse, mug anybody at any time in front of anybody else, anything they could do to get it. But also There's a lot of money involved, and a lot of, because the 3.0 was a very low priced drug market for crack, the Jersey kids would come over all the time, and they'd buy it and go home and sell it for 2 or 3 times as much and make money. So we all of a sudden we had a lot more vehicle traffic, all Jersey plates, double parked, triple parked. You couldn't get through the street in your radio car because there was, deals going on in front of you, right in front of you. It was insanity. But the shootings picked up dramatically too. The drug robberies, the turf battles. Is a lot of money to be the guy that owns, let's say, the southwest corner of 143 in Hamilton Place. That's your corner. You own it. You got your spot upstairs or spots. You can't have somebody else selling on your corner. So it becomes violence. So the homicides and the shootings picked up overnight, and things got really crazy. One specific night, I was walking a foot post, and I was on 144th Street, right at Amsterdam and Hamilton Place where it meets. And that whole street, 144th Street, was on fire for a long period of time. So I'm out there and I'm looking at a car that's parked outside a bodega, and it just looks dirty. And I'm about to check the plate. And all of a sudden I hear running coming down the block at me, but it's around the corner. I can't see it, but I hear people running and huffing it and talking. And then I see them turn the corner. I turn my head and I hear a double barrel 12 gauge shotgun go off, maybe 25 feet away from me.
Jeez.
Scared the hell out of me because I didn't know where it came from.
Right.
So I whip out my gun. I put over the air, shots fired. I'm grabbing people. I'm trying to control the situation. My hair is standing up on end, and I'm just trying to make sense of the situation. And thank goodness it was a busy enough Manhattan precinct where cops are concentrated, and they're only a couple blocks away. So I hear the sirens coming, which is real nice to hear at a moment like that. Mm-hmm. Turns out these guys on the other end of the block had tried a drug robbery. They had gone into a Dominican spot with a shotgun, with a couple other guns, and they got met by, more serious firepower and people who were not going to give up money to them. It was an ill-advised decision to go into one of these spots and try to rob them. They were loaded for bear. So they came running down the street because they were being chased by guys on the other end. I didn't hear any shots from down the other end of the street, but they were running, trying to get away for their lives. One guy had a double-barrel 12 gauge, and he had no trigger guard on it. And as he's running, he sees me, and he tries to stick it in his pants to hide it. Well, the trigger hit the pants, and both barrels went down, hit the ground, and as ballistics will have it, came right back up into him. Ooh. To his groin area and his lower abdomen. Oh. So he's in agony, and he's bleeding out like crazy on the street. And I'm screaming, "Who shot you? Who shot you?" And he's telling me some guy wearing yellow, the other end of the block. So I'm standing there, and I'm calling for an ambulance. We're trying to get help. I'm thinking this guy's a victim. Somehow he's shot. Somebody must have shot him, and I don't see a gun on his hand. Meanwhile, I got other guys that I've been hitting with my gun and knocking on the floor. It's just insanity. And as we're trying to make sense of it, I look across the street, up into a window, second floor, and I see somebody standing there waving at me like this. Come here, come here. So I asked the other cops, "Can you just watch him? I'll be right back." I went up in the hallway. Turns out the guy was watching the whole thing. He said, "That guy shot himself. The shotgun's under the car right next to him because he slid it out and put it under there." So I went back down, hands and knees. I pull it out. It's still smoking, I get to the hospital, and I go to see the guy. He's being wheeled into surgery. And he said, "Did you get the guy that shot me?" I said, "I sure did." And I cuffed him to the gurney. He's like, "What?" He couldn't believe it. Yeah, he's a parolee for robbery, of course. Shocking, right? Yeah. But I mean, that was a night in the 3.0 during crack. And that was just, my experience that night. The violence was everywhere. It was out of control.
It spoke to a city in decay, a country in decay, really. And the sad part about it is, and Pete Pranzo's in the chat, he's a retired street crime lieutenant, and he would know, he was in the thick of street crime during that period, is that it was anyone. You think about a drug addict, not you specifically, but speaking generally, and you think it's someone that's in a low income, high crime area. And that's partly the case. Back then, businessmen were doing it. You'd see nurses go and doing it. People from all different sectors of life were bonded together in the worst way possible by this drug. It was truly affecting and choking the life out of everyone, literally and figuratively, not only destroying the person physically, destroying their lives at home, destroying families. It was a terrible time for the city.
Mm-hmm. It really was. And it destroyed a lot of lives. A lot of people who thought they could dip their feet in the water and party with it on the weekends found out soon that its addictive qualities were far more strong than almost anything else out there. It was highly and almost instantly addictive.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed worlds. It destroyed families. And I remember even, interestingly enough, as my time as detective, looking at mugshots of people throughout their criminal career. And you can tell when crack hit, all of a sudden they stop looking healthy, stop looking vibrant, start getting really thin, start getting withdrawn. I mean, you can see it. And that's what with heroin too, and many other drugs. But crack was the drug du jour, and it really did a lot of devastation.
So going back to your career now, you ended up making sergeant in 1988. How early did you start studying for sergeant? And did you have that ambition when you came on the job, or was it something that developed gradually on patrol?
Actually, I didn't make sergeant until 97.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I thought you had made it in earlier for some reason.
I went on the investigative track. I went to the Manhattan North Task Force. I left the 3O to go there to get steady tours to go back to school to finish my degree, and worked with a great crew there at night. And we were in the 3-4 every night. So it really that was the Wild West too.
Oh, okay.
But from there, I went to the Manhattan Warrant Squad, and I went through that. I decided, I would love to do detective work. I was very impressed with the detectives that I had seen in my career. And to me, that was fascinating, interesting work. So I went that route. I was promoted to sergeant in 97, and I kind of was ambivalent about it at the time because I was in the major case squad and loved what I was doing when I got called to get promoted. But it ended up working out great. I was very happy to get the experience with it, but I really enjoyed being a detective more than any other rank.
So we'll go back to that, and you can dock me 10 points for that. Sorry about that. Did you make the task force in 88 then? Is that correct?
North Task Force.
Okay, that's what it was.
North of 59th Street, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I knew it was something in 1988. It wasn't sergeant, but it was you going to the task force. So I'll get to major case in a second. But was that the narcotics task force specifically that you went to?
No, just a uniform patrol.
Okay, uniform task force. All right, during that time, more uniform work. So, of course, going to warrants at the time, warrants is dangerous because I've had this discussion with a few people before. You're dealing with people, and it just passed 25 years, for example, for Anthony Mosamillo's murder in 1998. What was he trying to do when he was shot and killed? He was trying to arrest someone on a warrant, a parolee that had missed a court appearance. And with that being said, it's exactly that. Some people will go down easy. Some people want to clean the slate. That's not the case with everyone. Not only do they not want to go to jail, they're willing to fight you, and they'll fight you to the death if they have to. Mm-hmm. So going into warrants, again, working with people that have been there a while, what's the mentality specifically? Because even though the mission is the same, which, no matter what unit of the NYPD you're in, each unit has its own separate attitude given the kind of work they're doing. What's the mindset of a warrants cop?
Well, in warrants, we had a lot of cases, obviously, and everything's a felony. You're trying to catch people and usually it's drug dealers. That's the run-of-the-mill, hand-to-hand sales to undercover narcotics detectives. So really, a lot of them weren't necessarily difficult to deal with. And the best way to get them is in bed in the morning. I mean, we worked early tours. So minimize the opportunity for them to run through a window or pull a gun on you and just, wake them up at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning when they've been out till 4. And they don't know what's going on. Before they know it, they're cuffed and they're on their way to court. That's generally what you would do. But we did have more than our share of people who were the career criminals, 3 strikes. We had people who would, in the middle of their criminal trial, they were out on bail and they saw things weren't going good and they would just abscond. And the judge would get ticked off after lunch and he would call up, have his clerk call a warrant squad and say, go get this guy now. And so you're going out after a guy who's looking at 25 to life, knows it, and really doesn't want to go back to jail. So I had plenty of fights. I had guns pulled. I had all kinds of stuff happen. And I had people hide in the most bizarre places. I had 2 guys hide in a refrigerator in an apartment. Now, if I didn't come along and open the door just out of curiosity, they would have died in there. But they couldn't open the door from the inside. But it's remarkable what people do. I've had a guy that I was looking for one time. I had no idea, but he had committed a homicide the day before in the 2-5 precinct in East Harlem. And as I go into his bedroom, his mother lets me in. He jumps out the window onto the fire escape and takes off. I thought, well, that's a lot for a hand-to-hand. He's just going to get another, released on recognizance and another date. But I go up to the squad and they're like, oh, we're looking for him. That kind of stuff. You don't know what you're rolling into sometimes. And so it's 2 of you with your little guns on and it's just your wits. How do you do this? How do you get people to show up places that they don't want to and tell them that we had a guy, a true story, Mike Foyle, rest in peace. was a very senior officer in Warrants, was a great guy. I was working with him one day, and he had a warrant on a guy who shot a bartender during a robbery in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And he skipped out on his bail during his trial. He did just what I said before. He saw that things weren't going his way. His family had put up a house. He didn't care. He's like, I'm not going back to prison. Well, the guy that he shot during a robbery ended up living but lost an eye. So he was looking at some serious time, but he had taken off and Mike couldn't find him. And Mike did a bunch of records checks and found out there was a phone number in Connecticut that he had called during a years before arrest. So he called the number up in Connecticut and he gets the guy on the phone and the guy's like, and Mike says, don't hang up. Listen. He's like, what? He says, here's the deal. The guy that you shot, not only is he alive, but he's now wanted and he skipped out and he didn't come down and testify. The judge is pissed off at the whole case, wants to give you a break. If you can bring a money order for $250 made out to the New York State Office of Court Administration to pay for court fees, he'll let you plead guilty to time served and the case will be gone, which is what every perp wants to hear. This trouble is behind me. It's all a lie, of course. He had been sentenced in absentia to 12 and a half to 25 years. And for some reason, he didn't know that because he was on the run. So he's up in Connecticut. And so Mike tells him this, and he says, yeah, I'll show up 100 Center Street on Monday morning. He didn't think it would happen. We went out Monday morning. We grabbed somebody on something else. We come into the warrants office down at court, and there's this guy sitting there with a rented tuxedo on, his hair all done up in jerry curls and green patent leather shoes, waving his $250 money order. Got my money order. So Mike looks at me, and the both of us burst out laughing. We said, we'll be right back. We went outside. It took us 5 minutes to compose ourselves. We couldn't believe he fell for it. Cuffed him up, told him just formality. We walked him into the courtroom, handed the court docket paperwork to the court officers, and ran from the courtroom. Because I didn't want to be there when they told him, you've been sentenced and you're remanded to the New York State Department of Correction. He probably lost his mind. But you do what you have to do. Hey, I have no bad feelings about that. Did we trick him? Yeah. He's a bad guy. So, you did what you had to do.
It's no great loss. It's no great loss at all. No, and you know what? You have to, again, as I've covered with many detectives over the time that I've spent interviewing former New York City police officers, you have to think like a perp sometimes, And listen, there's no honor amongst thieves. You guys aren't thieves, obviously. I'm not saying that. But you have to get inside their heads because that's the only way you can stay a step ahead of them. And are a lot of them stupid, as that gentleman was? Yeah. But some of them, as I've said many a time as well, it's not that they're dumb. It's just that they're making bad life choices. Their life choices are stupid, but they're not. So,
Right.
That's why you have to think like them sometimes so you could stay ahead of them. And that's a great example.
Yep, and there's been many of them that I've arrested who I've called up and told them, I just need to take a quick statement from you. Can you come in and do that and get this over with so I can get rid of this case? And they think to themselves, if he was going to arrest me, he'd have come and got me because he knows my number and he knows where I'm living. Meanwhile, I'm just busy. And can you come in? And I would have them come in. I'd have them write out a statement. And all I needed was for them to put themselves at the scene. Yeah, I was there, but I didn't do anything. That's good enough. And then I bring them in. I need you to sit in this room and hold this number up. What's this for? Formality. Really? Put them in a lineup. They're sitting there. They think they're going home. They get identified, and then I bring them out. Do me a favor. Sit in there for a second. I put them in a cell. I close the door. I start typing up the arrest report, and they look at you. Am I under arrest? It's hysterical. You should have realized that some time ago that this was not going in your direction. Yeah, I hate to tell you, but and the other inmates, the other guys sitting in the cell just crack up at him like, man, you're about as stupid as they come. But rather than spend your whole day chasing people, if you can get them to come to you, that's the beauty of it. And they always have that hope. I can get past this. I can get over this. And that's what you leverage.
This ain't an episode of Law and Order, those rare instances when Jack McCoy wouldn't get his man. This is real life. And 9 times out of 10, 99.9% of the time, you'll always have that little 1% where the criminal justice system doesn't do its job. But for the most part, you guys get your men and women.
Well, not perfect, but I really did try to give closure to my cases as much as possible. That's the goal. Absolutely.
Oh, clearance rates. One thing that you mentioned and highlighted previously, and I think in our interactions on LinkedIn, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to get this wrong, you might have been a major case at the time. When the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center hit, you investigated that case, I think, in its aftermath. Didn't you? You had a role in that?
I was not in major case yet.
So where were you at the time?
Bill Ryan was in A&E. He was involved in that investigation, but no, I got there a few months later. Yeah, there was lingering effects from that investigation for a long time, but that was much more an A&E investigation than ours.
Okay, which has been covered before on Tales from the Boom Room. Because yeah, I know you brought that up, so I wanted to ask you at least to see if there was something there. But yeah, no, A&E did a great job with that one. And I remember Billy Ryan telling me the story when I first interviewed him for Volume 1 of Tales from the Boom Room, that they came in and they asked, well, who has the case? And he was fairly new in A&E at the time. Jerry Sheehan, who was a CO at the time, points to him and says, the kid. He's like, what? And they're like, don't worry, the FBI will come in and take it from your hands in 15 minutes. And sure enough, that's exactly
what happened. Yep. Sure enough.
That's exactly what happened with that. So, of course, you get into major case, and I believe, as you said, in the summer of 1993. And it's not too long before you have this case, which you talked about exclusively in a Gold Shields episode, in which it was, I believe, a kidnapping / homicide case involving a Chinese gang, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, this was the King of Clubs case. Now, I was not the case officer, but I was one of a small group of just a few of us in the major case squad who had an area of expertise with Asian organized crime, gangs, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and we had been hit with quite a few, several dozen every year, Asian gang-related kidnappings. Usually, it was alien smuggling related, and this specific case, we had two separate cases in the office. Two separate detectives had a case of an Asian illegal alien in New York City, just working for a living, trying to make it, who had been kidnapped. Now, the cases were cold. There wasn't much going on. No activity with the people in America. There's a reason for that. But unbeknownst to us at the time, they were both kidnapped along with a third victim by the same crew, this member of the Fukinese Flying Dragons, who I was doing a federal RICO case on with the FBI at the time, but this was a subset of that group. They were a kidnapping group, and they did it quite routinely, and they made a good deal of money because most of those folks didn't have the wherewithal or the desire to go to the police. They would just, they would figure out a way to pay, and they would pay something to save their lives or their family's life. And so the ransom demands were being made to family in China, so our cases were cold. Well, I went out for the weekend to Montauk with some friends, and this was Labor Day weekend, 1995. And as I'm coming back into beeper range, because back then it was beepers, 1995, and my beeper's going off like crazy. It's the major case squad office, all kinds of codes like, 911, call. So I finally get to a payphone, I call. Turns out this case blew up over the weekend. What happened is they're holding these three people in this apartment in Brooklyn in the 6th precinct in Borough Park area. And they killed one woman whose family flat out said they didn't have the money. And they killed her several different ways, and they were very brutal about it. It was really nasty. They wrapped the other woman up, and it was a guy. They wrapped the other woman up in duct tape like a cocoon so she could barely move. And they took the guy out, and they said, we're going to go kill him, we're going to party, and we're going to come back and kill you. So she's laying there right next to the dead woman, and she realizes, I guess they mean it when they say they're going to kill, so I better do something. Figures out a way to worm her body over to the stove, and with her mouth turns on the stove, finds a way with her mouth to get a newspaper and heaves it up on top of the stove. It starts a fire, sends out just enough smoke. Somebody calls 911, the fire department comes. They come through the smoke, they see the crime scene. Now it starts getting unraveled. Who are you? What's your name? I was kidnapped. They called major case. That starts unraveling. At the same time, out in the Queens and Nassau County border area near Long Island Jewish Hospital, right off the highway, these guys pulled the car over, grabbed the guy out of the car, and shot him in the head. Now, he lived because the round did what ballistics sometimes will make it do. It just traveled around the outside. It gave him a big headache and a concussion, but it didn't kill him. So he woke up from his being knocked out briefly, walked out, and almost got hit by a truck on the highway. Starts a whole chain of events. So we go into full-out mode. Two of these three people are our two kidnapping victims from our open cases. Now we got to figure out, we're racing against the clock. How do we get these folks? Turns out we didn't know it, but they took off. They bolted for the West Coast. Now, the New York newspapers made a big thing of it, the King of Clubs murder, because they put a note down the shirt of the dead woman, taunting us, saying we would never catch them. This is a clue to who we are. It was something out of a crime novel, actually. They were really cocky. They figured we would never figure out who they were. They made their way out to California. And at the same time as we were having our kidnapping, the FBI had a kidnapping in Seattle, Washington, Asian related. They had made a couple of arrests. And it turns out at the time, there were these calling cards, AT&T calling card with a number on it. If you use that number, you can go to payphone and call anywhere in the world for as much time as the credit was on the card. The same calling card numbers were used in Seattle and in New York to call the victims. That's how we tied them together. So myself and Billy Oldham, another detective, took a trip out to Seattle. We interviewed their two perps. They told us next to nothing, but we were on at least a path with them. We came back, and all of a sudden, a day or two later, Billy looks at me and he goes, "They're in L.A." I said, "How do you know they're in L.A.?" He says, "I have a snitch in L.A., and they're staying in his apartment." That's pretty good information. So within an hour or two, we're headed out to JFK Airport for L.A. We made our way out there, and we spent probably 5 or 6 days, running around the L.A. area, kicking doors in with the L.A. Sheriff's Office. We ended up making 2 arrests of the 5 perps in the L.A. area. The other 3 took off, and they went north to a city called Milpitas, California. And due to some interesting phone work, we managed to locate them there, had the locals surrounded, and we grabbed them the next day. These guys, when we grabbed the first 2 in L.A., we had to kick a door in because one of them jumped out the back window. And the one guy gets up off the floor, and in front of him on the floor is 17 sets of identification. INS cards, driver's licenses, you name it, for 17 different people who they had kidnapped. They kept all their IDs. So it made our case easy. We found the 17 people and charged them with 17 kidnappings. It was a crazy, crazy case. And it was a real race against the clock because these guys are on the run. And they would have kept going. They had enough money. They made good money. They demanded $38,000 from each victim. So they were doing okay. But that was a crazy case. That was a very crazy case.
But at least it had a good outcome. And I loved the end of that episode of Gold Shields, where you're on the plane, you're exhausted, and you can't wait to get back home to your family. The flight attendant, I'll let you tell the rest of that story. What did she do for you? This is actually really heartwarming.
Yeah, I was sitting in it, and I had to buy clothes from a store that was open all night because we just ran out of clothes, And I'm wearing, it's Levi's country, San Francisco, San Jose area. So I'm wearing a Levi's t-shirt, Levi's jeans. I look like an ad for Levi's. It was the only thing I could find. And I strap in, and right across from me is the flight attendant. She straps in and she goes, "What, do you work for Levi's?" I said, "No." I could barely talk. I was so tired, but I'm reading the New York Times because they had a really long article on the case. I just wanted to see, it's nice to see your work get put out there. And as I'm reading it, she goes, what brings you out here? And I said, I was here for this. I just gave her the paper, and she read the article. She looked at me. She goes, "You're part of that?" I said, yeah. There's a group of us that were here. I happen to be going home right now. She goes, "Oh my God." I said, "I haven't been home much, so I can't wait to get home." So before I left the plane, she gave me 2 big bags filled with wine from first class and these really nice gooey cookies they used to give you in first class on planes, games for my kids, toys, you name it. She just took everything on the plane and threw it in bags for me. Now, I had little kids. I walked in the door. I was like the king. I had something for everybody. So, but I never forgot it because it was a real sincere gesture of appreciation and gratitude that I never expected. And it was just something that made it on top of the feeling of satisfaction of helping to being a part of getting justice for these victims. That was a nice moment, I will admit.
Oh, of course. Definitely, for sure. Shout out in the live chat. I don't want you guys to think I missed you. Kevin Pierce, I appreciate you being here. Black Rose 11. And Scott Wagner, who knows a thing or two about solving cases. Of course, he was a hostage negotiator and a homicide detective in the old housing police and the NYPD. It's good to see you, buddy. You haven't popped up in my chats in a bit. We'll talk soon because Scotty and I got a little project, some unfinished business that we got to take care of. So, Scott, we'll be in touch. After solving a case like that, you can't rest on your laurels, rather. You're on such a high. It's an amazing thing to have gotten something like this done. It wasn't just you. It was a team. It was a group effort. But still, you're all feeling so great. but it's right back to work. And that's an interesting mentality to put yourself in. But by this point, you had a lot of time on the job. And quite a bit of major case. I imagine once you hit the ground running, naturally you get over the fatigue mentally and physically, right back to work, because there's something just as big just around the pike,
Absolutely. Yeah, we were handling 55 to 60 kidnappings a year at my time there. And those are all people being held for ransom, a lot of them with us going up on wiretaps and numerous surveillance units and, ransom drops in the middle of the night with dummy rolls of money or real money if the family had it. You name it. Some of them are easy and some of them took weeks, if not more. And you don't really rest until that victim is freed. It's a high pressure situation.
No, for sure. A couple of questions I want to ask you about major case before I move on to some of the other units that you spent some time in. Two things. One, obviously kidnappings, that would make sense that you guys would take that case because of the stakes that are involved. Besides an obvious case like that, what is the criteria, without giving anything confidential away, of course, for a major case to say, you know what, yes, we will take that case?
Well, it's what's written in the detective guide. There is parameters for certain specialized units. Major case takes all bank robberies with notes in New York City. They took truck hijackings. They took burglaries over a certain threshold in Manhattan and other boroughs, another threshold. Rare or very valuable works of art. Certain niche things. Some of them had come. It was a conglomeration of groups from the Safe Loft and Truck Squad that were experts in burglary and truck hijacking. And the Major Case Squad was actually formed in the early 1970s as a way to collect within the NYPD expertise and oversight and guidance on cases involving the homicides of police officers. Back in those days, there was a lot of them, and they were being targeted for assassination. And so that's why it originally was formed. So anytime a cop was shot or killed, we assisted in the investigation. We never took the case. That's a squad case, but we would come out and be part of the investigation and try to lend extra bodies and maybe a little bit of expertise with working with those cases. I was blown away by the professionalism of some of the people I worked with there and the just the history on the job. And I went there with 10 years on the job, and I was the kid in many ways, So I just kept as much as possible my mouth shut and listened, and I learned a lot. It was a great experience.
Oh, that's the best way to be. That's how you learn, of course. Steve Irato, Pee Wee, I see you in the live chat as well. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining the program tonight and watching along as we interview retired NYPD Sergeant Dan Murphy for episode 249 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Now, interesting in this as well, that in the 90s, you're seeing the shift, of course. And I know how it affected cops on the street when broken windows came into effect and the shackles were taken off and cops were unleashed to finally be cops again after a rough period. But for the Detective Bureau, specifically a major unit like that one, was there any semblance of an effect in a positive way that you saw in broken windows being put into place as Commissioner Brad and later Safer and Carrick were there?
Well, I think that sort of enforcement effort has trickle effects to every unit, of course. I think one of the things that we saw, and when you're doing background investigation work on people, it's great to have documented arrests and pictures and images on file and stuff. And so there was a lot of enforcement going on back then. So if you got a name in an investigation, the chances are good you might have a picture with it now, whereas a few years earlier, there might not be that level of enforcement in every neighborhood. So that didn't hurt. And it always kicks up dust. Enforcement kicks up dust. People that you're looking for all of a sudden get picked up in a sweep of a housing project in Brooklyn. You drop a wanted card for somebody, and next thing you know, you're getting a call. Yeah, they got picked up because there's a lot more people out. Cops are out knocking doors down, and more aggressive enforcement is going on. So your bad guys picked up with other bad guys as opposed to wandering the street. So there was benefits for everybody. It was more intelligence. There was more focus on apprehending people. The warrant squad became much more focused on bringing people in who were in the upper tier or the criminals as opposed to low-level misdemeanor stuff. It did spread across the job. We still got the same amount of cases. We still got the same focus, but I guess there was a lot of stuff that was now in the pipe or in the system that could help us with our cases. So in that way, I think it helped us.
And the last note on major case before I move on to OC ID, of course, and we'll talk about that as well as a little bit of the JTTF before your retirement in 2004. we've heard in the past about some of the issues that the NYPD and the FBI have had. You have two large agencies with a lot of resources, and sometimes there's been that clash. But from what I've heard you and Tom talk about, seems like you guys, at least in Major Case and later on in JTTF, got along pretty well with them. So tell me about that collaboration on the field with some agents that added a lot, just like you added a lot to the work that they were doing.
You know, there's good and bad in any organization, and I think the rank and file of the FBI, there's a lot of professionalism there. There really is. Their organization has what's been described to me once as an organizational arrogance, institutionalized arrogance, I should say. That they teach them in Quantico, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best, you're the top. Everybody's going to respect you. And that may work in some parts of the country, but it doesn't really work in New York. So the best agents are the ones who don't walk in like they own the street. And they just try to be helpful. And if you get somebody like that, you can work with them and you can absolutely do things in tandem. But they have a reputation, and I've seen it myself, of taking credit for work they didn't do, of trying to get information from you. And so there's a lot of that goes on too. And that really hurts the overall reputation. It makes it hard for the next young agent to walk into a precinct and say, hey, I'm here to be a partner in this. So I think the better ones are the ones that once you get to know them and they get to know you, and if you're working in something in tandem with them, it's worked out in advance. You know, what is this going to end up like? Is this going to be an FBI case or is this going to be an NYPD case? Because let's get that clear now. And our bosses, I mean, my CO in Major Case Squad hated the FBI. The fact that I was working on something with them, and, you know, you work a federal RICO case, and I worked a lot of RICO cases, you have to have a federal agency with you. And it made sense to have them for this one that I was doing. And so there was a lot of tug of war there between them. And, you know, even simple things. We're going to have a meeting about a case. Well, I'm not walking over to Federal Plaza. Well, I'm not walking over to police headquarters. So, okay. So the agents and detectives would meet, but the bosses wouldn't. You know, it was crazy. It is crazy, and it's counterproductive. There's good and bad everywhere, and there's a lot of agents who I had a great experience working with, and I will always tip my hat to them.
I remember chronicling, you remember this job in 1997 when those two guys from Hamas wanted to blow up the Atlantic Avenue subway. I did a show, and Billy Ryan, you remember the show, with Fred Manzalilla from the Arson Explosion Squad, as well as a couple of fellows from the Bomb Squad and Emergency Service. And Joe Dolan, who was in Emergency Service at the time and later went to the Bomb Squad, was talking about the crime scene. He's like, you know, we wanted to make sure we didn't clean up the blood or anything from when they shot the guys because we wanted to make sure the FBI could find the crime scene. You know, so yeah, there was always that bone of contention. I think it's gotten a little bit better now, but it's kind of like, as people have described ESU and FDNY sometimes, whenever our knucklehead would mess with their knucklehead, that's when the trouble would be. Otherwise, everyone else was fine.
Yeah.
So
Turf battles. Well, I think the city of New York didn't do the FDNY and the ESU a favor by giving them parallel, if not similar, responsibilities at certain scenes. That's set up the arguments that we've seen. That's set up the fist fights. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, at least it's mellowed out over the years. So, you know, with that being said, now I guess that brings us into your time in organized crime. And what's interesting about OCID at this time is that when people think of organized crime, naturally they think about the mafia, and that's part of it too. But there's so many other facets to OCID. There's drug gangs, you know, there's also street gangs. There's other criminal enterprises that are in effect. You talked about the detective guide earlier. Besides the obvious ones, such as gangs, what other criminal enterprises does the OCID investigate?
Well, it's very ethnically driven. Most organized crime entities in New York City are separated or siloed by their ethnicity. You have Greek organized crime, believe it or not, that's involved in a variety of things. You have Albanians.
I can believe that.
Yeah. You have them. They do all kinds of high-end burglaries and things like that. You have, they used to have Hell's Angels, the Westies, which were Irish American at least, and you know, you have Jamaican drug crews, you have Dominican drug crews, and they do a variety of things. You have the Bloods, the Crips, all these kind of things that are gangs, but they're also organized crime. So when I was in Organized Crime Investigation Division, the mandate that the team that I was in it was part of a task force with the DEA, and my team was Asian heroin. So we were looking at Southeast Asian heroin importation and distribution. And so we're looking at Asians all of a sudden. And it's, you know, it can be a Korean. It can be, you know, mainland Chinese guy. It can be a lot of different things, Vietnamese. There's, but they do tend to silo themselves, these groups, these entities, by ethnicity. It's what they know. It's their culture. They bring it over here and they band together. So that's kind of how OSID was sort of broken up. And when I first went up there to the HIDA task force, it was called in OSID, there was 3 teams. The first was South American cocaine, strictly Colombian, pretty much. Then it was the Southeast Asian heroin. And the third was what they called non-traditional, which could be anything. It could be a variety of, but it really seemed to settle on the Dominicans at the time because they were being extremely violent and they were making a lot of money and doing a lot of shootings. So that became a focus. So I would say it's much more than Italian, although there'll always be a focus on the Italian organized crime. And the Organized Crime Investigation Division has a number of teams assigned to them. But I would say the heavier work or the crazier work that's being done is being done among non-Italians in the organized crime realm in New York City.
It makes sense. As somebody who's Dominican, I could say this. We're a wild bunch, some in a good way, some in a not so good way. So, yeah, some of those callers might have been my extended family, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah. Hey, my family wasn't always saints. I left out the Russians, too. I mean, anybody who's been to Brooklyn South will tell you that the Russians have an impact. And even John Gotti said, don't mess with them. They're crazy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If John Gotti's saying that, then they definitely should not be messed with.
They don't play. No,
they don't. They do not. They scare me. If they're not churning out gangsters, and this is not all of Russia, of course, but a certain contingent. If it's not gangsters they're churning out, it's MMA fighters, and they're scary too. So, world class either way. It just depends on the profession.
Or hockey players.
Or hockey players, yes. Yeah, they have given us great hockey players. Thank you very much for Pavel Bore. So appreciate that, amongst others. So, of course, you partnered while in OCID. I mean, there are some drug cases going on, too. You talked about Dominican drug gangs. Was it easier partnering with DEA than FBI?
I found it pretty easy. Yeah, they were it's a different organizational feel. It's funny, in the Department of Justice, everybody says that the FBI is the fair-haired children. They get everything they want, and they do. They have a lot of pull. If they want a case, they get it. The Attorney General sides with them over any other group within them. And DEA feels a little bit of that, and they have a very specific mandate for narcotics. And for a period of time, the FBI jumped into the narcotics world, and I think 9/11 changed that. They changed their focus again. But DEA was a great organization to work with. I mean, I really enjoyed the folks I work with. I found the bureaucracy not too difficult to deal with, and they were really supportive of the work. They really wanted us to succeed, and I enjoyed that.
Oh, of course, and that's I've heard that about the DEA and the ATF, that they were the easiest federal agencies to work with, because as one of the bomb squad guys told me, speaking specifically about the ATF, they're just cops. And he meant that in a loving way. They're cops. At the end of the day, when you have, and that's the ultimate compliment you could pay somebody. If they're just regular schmegular cops that are out there just focused on the work, hey, that's as much as you can ask for. It's as good as it gets.
DEA is the same way. I mean, not afraid to go rushing through a door. They don't know what's on the other side of it. Not afraid to rip a gun out of somebody's hand on the street. I mean, they were active, and they were aggressive when they had to be. And it was tactically, they were very sound. Everything I saw from them was great. So I didn't worry about that. The FBI is much more focused on paperwork and things like that. That they're different. They're less proactive, less street active. It's not how they're designed.
Yeah, they have their positive functions, but it's more on the clerical side that they shine. I mean, once they put those cases together, you see the outcome of it. It's great. There's a lot of attention to detail, but the street level work, that's in New York City, at least, that's the name of you guys' game. Yeah,
marshals are a great service too. U.S. Marshals Service, man, I had great experiences with those guys. Phenomenal stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. They're cops too. Hi, Michelini Serino. It has indeed been a long time. Good to see you, of course. When you got promoted to sergeant in 1997, I believe you went to the Bronx, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I did. The beautiful 46th precinct.
So you're back on patrol for a little bit before you get back into the detective bureau. You had some time in major case. Your favorite rank was detective, and it's not a step down because there's still a lot of work to be done. But did you find yourself kind of, even though you're elevated in rank now, feeling like a rookie again, because now you have to, after so many years out of the patrol mentality, get back into it?
Oh, yeah. I had been almost 9.5 years or something off patrol, and patrol had changed. There was new radio codes. There was additional radio codes. The first time I sat in a radio car to be driven around, one of my first nights in the command, I took a look. I couldn't believe all the stuff that was in it. I said, "What's all this?" I mean, I don't know how to. Do you know how to use this? Because I don't know how to use it. I'm glad you do. I open up the glove compartment. There's a taser in there. I was like, I was never trained on this. It was weird. It felt really weird. But I had a great experience there. I really enjoyed going back because I saw opportunities to help younger cops figure out a path in the job and teach them about what there is beyond this. If you want to do something in the police department and you want to be a detective or you want to be a boss or something, you can do it. It starts here, and here's a good path for you. Build a good record for yourself. Be reliable. Show up on time. Look good. Do what you're supposed to do and be productive, and you can write a lot of your own ticket in the NYPD if you do that. There is opportunity. And it was great to go back to a busy place because I had worked in a busy place earlier, and the cops were real experienced, really good at what they did in many ways. There's always some that aren't. That's going to be in every command. But I fell into a command that was a very proud command. The 46th Precinct had been through a lot and had some really, really heavy hitters in it, and legendary type of cops and detectives. And so it was great to go to a place that had that mystique and had that pride about itself. I mean, they were proud to be 46 cops. And I had great bosses that I worked alongside of who I learned from. Great CO. Terry Monahan was phenomenal to me, and great. Anybody who worked.
He was your CO?
He was my CO there.
Wow.
Yep.
I didn't know. I knew he was in the Bronx. I just forgot which precinct. Yeah, that's crazy.
He actually credits his rise to chief of department with his 1 year working as my CO. He said that everything I have, I owe to you. I mean, I'm shy to accept that, but it was nice of him. I'm totally kidding, of course. No, he was great. He was very proactive, very aggressive, and he rewarded work. If you worked, produced numbers, and did the right thing, man, he'd take care of you. And that's all you can ask for, you know?
Oh yeah, back then. I mean, listen, he was a Cops cop. He was in an episode of Cops because it's funny, and we joked about this because I had him on a couple of years ago. In the first segment, ESU was doing a drug raid, and he's the first one up the stairs with them as a white shirt, with some street crime cops that are going in to do the takedown before ESU got in there. And unfortunately, the street crime cops had to kill an attack dog that was fast charging them for obvious reasons. And the one thing he had told them before they went on the job was, "Please don't shoot a dog." Yeah. As the dog's charging at him, the cops turned to him and they said, "Sorry, boss," and they had to let loose. So, I know he was. He had an interesting career. He had a very interesting career, and it ended as the chief of department, of course. So around this time, I mean, did you, even though, of course, police work is not simple, especially in New York City, it is stressful. Even if times are good and crime's going down, you're still busy. Did you find being back in uniform at this stage of your career less stressful than your time in the Detective Bureau?
I wouldn't say that. I would say it was more stressful because rather than being able to focus on my cases or focus on a matter at hand, I had to focus on 300 things at the same time. For example, if you're working the desk in a busy precinct on a summer night, you get no peace. The phone never stops ringing. You never stop making entries in the log. There's always 10 prisoners behind you. Somebody's screaming. Somebody needs an ambulance. There's always somebody bleeding in front of the desk. I mean, all night long, you're busy, and it's always stuff that could get you in trouble if you don't handle it right. You know, I mean, and it all falls on you. There could be a guy up on the third floor who decides to jump out a window and kill himself. And they're going to come to you and say, "Why didn't you know about that?" I mean, it's really a crazy role. And then being patrol sergeant, you got to make split decisions on the street. You're in charge of and responsible for and answerable for everything that goes on that 4 to 12 or that midnight shift. And sometimes you're nowhere near it, and you have to rely on your cops to tell you what happened. And the cops get hurt, and you feel bad. Crazy stuff happens. I mean, it was a great ride. I learned a lot. I don't know what I didn't encounter in my time there on patrol, but it was very interesting. But I really missed being able to focus on a case and put the pieces together and do that kind of stuff. So that was the trade-off. The trade-off was I was advancing my career per se, and giving myself an opportunity to get some leadership and some management under my belt, which was great, and I do not regret it at all. But I did miss the ability to come to work and be, all right, these are my cases. I know what I got. I know what I'm doing. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed chasing the bad guy.
Of course, I'm smiling because Billy Ryan put in the chat, trying to pull up his comment here. It's taking a little bit. The only FBI agents I trust are Mulder and Scully. So, oh, Billy, never shy to speak his mind. Thank you for supporting the show as always.
I love him.
No, me too. Me too. Listen, I credit two for the Bomb Squad miniseries. There's two things I credit. One is a book by Rich Esposito and Ted Gerstein that helped me learn about a lot of these guys. The other one's him because he gave it instant credibility. And a lot of the guys I know from A&E and the Bomb Squad, I met and I've been able to interview because of Billy. So he's a big part of this show. And he's always here. It's good to see you.
He's a very, very sharp detective, and he still is. And,
of course.
Friend and somebody I respect immensely. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Was it 1990? Because Tom Smith, we were emailing earlier, and he mentioned going, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the gang unit, the Bronx gang unit. Was that 99 that you got back to?
99 or 2000. I got assigned to the Bronx gang unit, which was at the time, I believe it was either, it went back and forth between being part of OCCB or the Detective Bureau. It was both for a period of time. And it was started, and the commanding officer was Jimmy McCool, who had been my sergeant in Brooklyn North Narcotics, and was a great guy. And I went there because I saw an opportunity to do gang stuff and RICO cases, which I really enjoyed doing. And he assigned me to the Bronx. I was living up in Orange County at the time. And I got there, and I met Tom, and I met the other detectives in the team. And, we had some great workers, and we had some non-workers. It was like that. But we had CompStat answerable responsibility, and we had at the time 45 or something thousand identified gang members in the Bronx. So the old joke about doing something about the flood, put your finger in it and try to do something. But our job there was it was being created as we were going along. What is the mandate and mission? To do something about the gangs, create cases, work alongside if a detective squad has a shooting involving gang members. See if you can help them with intelligence. See if you can help sniff out what might be going on. Develop informants so you can help them. Develop your own cases. Develop your own RICO cases. We had one part of our group was doing a wiretap with the DEA. But while I was there, a couple of detectives, John Keeley and John Patone, had been working on a case that became a big RICO that Tommy ended up jumping on, and George Duguid, and it was the original OG Mac, who was founder of the United Blood Nation, had his set on 183 Street. It was a 1-8 tray set. And we did about a 1.5 year RICO investigation with the Southern District on him and his crew. And it was a great case, very interesting case. Meeting informants at the middle of the night, faraway locations to get them to give you information. Learned about the Bloods and their culture and their language and all this other stuff. And it was fascinating. And the guys did a great job. And the prosecutor did a great job, and it was a lot of fun.
The funny thing, and I'm not mocking them because I'm not trying to get shot, is with Blood's gang members is that if you notice them, and people have parodied this in comedy videos on social media, they don't use the C in anything. It doesn't matter what the word is. A chocolate chip cookie, as we would pronounce it, is, I kid you not, for those of you in the chat that are not familiar with them, a Baclet Bip Bookie.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
If you say something with the C in it, they will literally kill you. It sounds so simple, but that's how they operate.
Crips. Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason, the C on his Crips, they tell you, brazy, man. You're being brazy. What? Being brazy. We had an informant in the case who had a little bit of trouble with certain letters and pronouncing certain things. And one night he comes to meet us, and it's like, 2:00 in the morning in some far-flung section of the Bronx. And he jumps in the car, and he's a big guy. And he's like, how you doing? I go, I'm tired. Why are you so tired from? My kid's sick. I take him to the emergency room. What's wrong? Couldn't move his vowels. I said, he couldn't move his A-E-I-O-U? What? I said, he couldn't move his vowels? Yeah. I said, look at me. Bowels. He goes, vowels. I can't make it. My bad. It was so funny. He couldn't say it. So to this day, bowels to me is vowels.
Oh God. Yeah, no, there's I know a few people like that, and again, every sentence it could be the most innocent, mundane sentence. It will become hilarious by the sheer fact that you cannot pronounce basic English. And it's just, God love them. God love them. So was it right after 9/11 that you went into JTTF?
Yeah, it took a little time to get the clearance, but I remember distinctly, I was in Taru. on 9/11, and I was a sergeant, and I was down on the pile with my team, and it was either the night of the 11th or the 12th, because I don't remember exactly, but I'm on top of the pile, and I got a call. One of the guys from the team that was a little further down, closer to the street, had a sat phone and said, "You got a call, Murph." I got a call? Yeah, it's Chief Pulaski. Chief Pulaski, who at the time was the chief of counterterrorism of the NYPD. "Hey, Danny," as though he knew me, and I maybe met him for 3 seconds once before. I said, "Chief, how are you?" He goes, "Hey, I want you to come to the JTTF. We're beefing it up. I want you to come. I want you to take a team." And at that moment, you're standing on the pile, you're looking for friends, bodies and stuff. And I was like, whatever you need, I am so there. I appreciate my position here with Taru and everything, but if I can be of help to that, and I can be a part of the answer for this, if I can help get some retribution for this, I'm in. Sign me up. So that began the process of waiting for the clearances. It took way too long for us to get our clearances, and finally assigned up there. And that was a big beef up, because the New York JTTF beefed up by, I don't know, 150 people or something. Mm. They needed it. It was so much smaller than it should have been. So a whole crop of us went up there brand new.
Did you know any of the 23 cops that perished that day?
Yeah, I did actually. Glenn Pettit, who was from the photo unit or
right. Video Academy.
Yeah, about 3 days before 9/11, he was out at Taru, and a bunch of us was supposed to go later on that week down to Washington, D.C. to augment police coverage for some major protest or something that was supposed to happen. I don't know if it was World Bank or what it was, but he came out, and I was going to be his supervisor with a bunch of my guys down in Washington, D.C. So I spent a few hours, got to know him a little bit. Next thing I know, I already got killed. Others were, I went to high school with a guy from the Port Authority Police, Al Niedermeyer. His sister was in my class. And there was a few others. Joe Vigiano, our paths crossed, worked on a cop shooting one night when he was in the 7.5. Went out, rode around all night with him in the car and did a bunch of stuff. Not long-term friends. And I had a slew of firefighters who I knew very well growing up. And Sergio Villanueva from the fire department had been a cop in the 4.6, and I respected the heck out of him. Just a great human being, a terrific street cop. And I ended up knowing, between civilians and first responders, about 24 people who got killed that day.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of great things about Villanueva, for sure. And in Glenn Pettit, it's ironic, because I remember, again, to mention Jerry Sheehan. Jerry Sheehan sent me a photo from August of 2001 that Glenn took of the guys from the bomb squad. And the ironic thing is, Danny Richards is in that photo.
Oh,
and
really?
Danny Richards, perished on 9/11 himself, from the bomb squad. It's right in that photo, right towards the front row. And I asked Jerry Sheehan, I'm like, well, who took this photo? Glenn Pettit.
Wow.
So one of the guys in that photo and the guy that took that photo both responded that day in different capacities. Danny with the bomb squad, Glenn, trying to video the attack to help out, his fellow first responders to better coordinate the rescue efforts, and both of them perished. So, I think it only augmented the need. And the interesting thing is that Ray Kelly comes in as commissioner in 2002. Carrick and Giuliani leave. Bloomberg and Kelly come in. And Kelly brings in David Cohen to format the Counterterrorism Bureau and beef it up, which he did. Rather or not you agree with how he did it, the point is he did do it. And it became a world-class counterterrorism operation. He used his background with the CIA to essentially build it from scratch. I don't know how much that affected the JTTF, if at all, but nevertheless, having a guy like Cohen there with his contacts, with his knowledge, and having a determined PC like Kelly, who Bloomberg backed off of and let him do his job, how do you think that aided the JTTF in 2002, in 2003, right before you retired?
I think it was a great thing. David Cohen more than once would come over to the JTTF offices, and guys would be going out for a couple of beers. He'd come with us. I sat with him more than once, chatted with him. He sincerely wanted to help build a world-class organization in the NYPD to gather intelligence, make it actionable, and work on it to protect the city. Ray Kelly is our police commissioner. He had to answer to the people of the city of New York and the mayor for what happened in his city. He couldn't hide in Washington. He couldn't run away. He wasn't nameless and faceless. So he felt that responsibility personally, and he took action to do something about it. Now, my brother was assigned to the intelligence division as a sergeant, and they became very proactive at that time. doing a lot to gather intelligence and information about what was going on in the tri-state area that was affecting New York. And what I think I saw among the FBI a little bit of, hey, what are you guys doing? Building your own agent. What are you trying to do? We're trying to protect our city. We're working with you in the JTTF. Don't worry about what we're doing on top of relying on you, because we can't let clearances and need to know and bureaucracy get in the way of us protecting our citizens. And so I think they did a great job building the Counterterrorism Bureau, the intelligence division, and our capacity by putting people around the world, NYPD sergeants and detectives and bosses around the world in various cities embedded with their intelligence services. So that way we got it right from the horse's mouth and we could work with it. That was the best way to do it, because if it went through channels, it was never going to make its way and filter down to the chief of patrol or the chief of detectives in the NYPD. It just wasn't going to ever happen. And we would be sitting there, with our pants down, getting caught unaware when some attack comes or when some person who we need to know about is in the city. Mm-hmm. So they did a great job. It ruffled the FBI's feathers, but I don't care. We had a responsibility to the people of the city of New York, and I think they did a phenomenal job. I think you encapsulated it correctly.
Well, as I talked about with John Cutter a few years ago when he was on the program, who was chief of intelligence, another great guy. Listen, in the aftermath, anybody that wants to challenge the NYPD during that time period, October, November 2001, listen, we just watched 3,000 of our fellow residents, among them 23 of our brothers and sisters in this department, die. Mm-hmm. So excuse us if we want to beef up our security. And if you remember, and I'm not trying to turn this into let's poop on the FBI podcast. That's not the intent. But there were some things, and it's chronicled in the book 1,000 Years for Revenge by Peter Lance, which is a great read, came out in 2003, the 1993 attack. There were some things that the FBI knew about in advance that they never told anybody. Nobody found out about until after the bombing. Mm-hmm. And that 6 people were killed. It gets dwarfed completely 8 years later to where, I can understand Ray Kelly and David Cohen saying, listen, we got caught twice. We can't get caught a third time.
Right.
You can't get caught a third time. How can we explain it? You can't explain it to families of lost loved ones. How can you look at the family of a lost loved one and say, yeah, we knew about it in advance. We just didn't do anything about it. You wouldn't be able to live with yourself.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I was very happy to see them doing that. Some great stuff came out of those units, out of that effort. And the people of the city of New York will probably never know how much safer they were because of those efforts. So to all the people involved, Cohen and the rest of them, everybody who built those programs, Eddie Hartnett. I mean,
I love him. He's been on the show too.
Yeah, he's on any show. Eddie, if you're listening, I'll have you on my show. What the? No, we know. I have great respect. He's a friend. He's a great guy. Yeah. We had to do what we had to do as a city. We had to make sure that we had set up a program in advance so that way we could get the best intelligence as soon as possible, rather than relying on our federal partners, who, frankly, whether it be through their own lack of desire to give it to us or the clearance issue, which can be a big hurdle. That need to know thing can really stop a lot of stuff, and it's there for a reason, but there's times when it needs a little flexibility. You're not on the case, you don't need to know, or you don't have the proper level of clearance, you can't sit here and listen to this briefing. Well, there's times when that's not the smartest thing to do.
Yeah, and you don't want it to compromise any potential investigation, especially since it's a matter of security.
Right.
So I guess that brings us into 2004. And I feel like at this point, you're at the apex of your career. Here you are, you're a sergeant, you're in a supervisory role, you're in an elite unit. And even though we all wish 9/11 didn't happen and the circumstances weren't so in the early 2000s, it's a unit that's doing tremendous work of keeping the city safe, beefing up the operations on the local front, as we just finished talking about. And everything's humming like a bird. It's humming like a well-oiled machine. And then you retire. When did the thought process start creeping in of, maybe it's time to go? And was there a definitive moment where you said, you know what, I should probably exit stage left?
Well, I had, in anticipation of retirement, I had working with an old partner from Major Case, John O'Boyle, great guy. We had started a business, and we wanted to see that business flourish. Next thing I know, I get assigned to JTTF. And frankly, in my position as a sergeant in JTTF, I didn't feel like I was doing what I could or should do. It was so many layers of bureaucracy built up, such an administrative role, so many meetings. I felt I was losing touch with, and I knew detectives would have a better opportunity to really do something. I felt that what I was doing, anybody else after me who was well-meaning could probably do. And not to minimize the role, but I had it in my mind that I wanted to get out after 20, and I thought about it, and I decided to go and let somebody else pick up. If I had an area of expertise I thought no one else could replace, I probably would have had a harder decision. But I felt it was in good hands. There's a lot of great people there, and I just felt it was my time to go. In so many ways, I was very burnt out from not necessarily the job itself, but the bureaucracies. The NYPD is its own bureaucracy, and now I'm embedded in the FBI's bureaucracy. And at my level, I was, in so many ways, just taking the blows so that members of the team could do their job. And was like, man, I just felt it wasn't for me anymore. And the day that I retired, it was December 16, 2003 was my last day. I went to the pension section, and when I walked out of there, I felt as though an 800-pound weight was lifted off my shoulders. I suddenly felt like a regular person again, and it felt really good. I felt I was kind of ready for that. Not everybody is ready at 20. They have more they want to add, they want to do. I felt I had done a lot of things, and I was ready to try something different with the next chapter, and I don't regret it, but there's a lot of great people there still doing it, and it was hard to leave.
Oh, of course, I imagine. We'll touch on that and a couple of things before we get to the rapid fire. I don't want to keep you too long, of course. But it's funny. I hearken back to, I believe it was the episode with Angel Masonette, where I think somebody either went up to you or to Tom and said, yeah, the NYPD, the world police, we call you the world police. And around that time, the work was so much, you guys really were the world police. Even if you weren't hopping on a flight and heading out to some destination, you had people all over the world. You had your fingers all over the world. And even though it's great work, it takes a toll on you mentally. It does age you before your time.
Yeah, I was starting to feel a little bit beyond my age. And as far as the world police is concerned, when I was in the major case squad, we jokingly called ourselves that because we were actively involved with authorities from agencies all over the place. One of the things the major case squad does is it does what's called staff assistance cases. Let's say, for example, the LAPD, and I had one time where Lonnie Anderson had a stalker in New York, and we were assisting the threat management unit from the LAPD on it. So it's my case. I open it up and I do some work for it. And you end up dealing with agencies from all over. And getting on a plane and doing stuff was not uncommon there. So, the joke about the world police, we had made arrangements with the Chinese police in the Fujian province, where if we had a kidnapping case, and it involved phone numbers and people over there, they would monitor the ransom drop in China, and they would make the arrests. And they loved it because they got to charge them locally and seize all the assets of the perpetrators and their families, which is an interesting law, but they were all about it. So we jokingly called ourselves that, but New York City in general really is. It's a global city. Everybody from four corners of the world makes their way through there. And so you deal with people from everywhere. I mean, it's unique in America in that respect. You'll never find a bigger cross-section of the world's inhabitants than you will in New York City.
No, it's a big city on steroids, and I mean that lovingly. And you were in the eye of the storm for all that time. Before I touch on the private sector and gold shields, Billy mentioned this to me, and I kept getting reminded. I kept popping up in my head throughout the show, and I didn't want to forget. So now I'll bring it up. You speak Spanish, which I find to be very, very impressive, or at least you spoke Spanish during the bulk of your career, and fluently, which as someone who's half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, I appreciate. Tell me about learning such a beautiful language. What inspired you?
Well, in the neighborhood I grew up in there was a significant Puerto Rican Latin section of the neighborhood, so to speak. And I went to school with kids from Ecuador and Puerto Rico and various places like that. And I saw signs. It's funny. You ride the subway, you see street signs, you see billboards in Spanish. And to me, it just seemed like when I went to high school to take a language, it made sense. So I figured, well, I mean, if I'm going to take a language, I might as well have it be useful. So I took it and I really liked it. It's a beautiful language that makes sense, that flows nicely. And I took to it and I kept getting A's. So now when you're getting 4 years of straight A's in high school in a class and you really enjoy it and you feel you have a little something you can use, I kept taking it in college. So I took it for 3 years in college. And then I come out at 21 years of age and I'm in the 90th precinct, which is medio Dominicano, medio Boricua. And so here I am, green-eyed Murphy. And if I don't try to speak to some of these people or try to listen to them and try to understand them, I'm not going to be effective at all. And I was afraid because I was a textbook, Spanish kind of speaker. And so I I used to tell them, español no tan bueno, por favor, habla lentamente. And they would, oh, you do, and they would try and they would help me. And I learned a lot by listening and paying attention. I made a lot of overtime by hearing things that people didn't think I would ever understand.
There you go.
Like debajo de la cama, under the bed. They'd be talking. You'd knock on the door, and a guy would turn. Where'd you put that under the bed? Okay, good. They let us in. And now I just turn to my partner and say, "I'll be right back." And I mean, simple things like that. But I think it's a great language. Every time I've had a chance to do executive protection and other security business down in Mexico and Guatemala, and even on vacations, Dominican Republic, etc. It just comes in handy, and I really enjoy being able to converse with people who speak Spanish. And I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but I'm proficient. I can get along. And the longer time I spend in an environment speaking it gets much better quickly, like anybody,
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Great language. Always love the culture, the food, the people, language, everything about it. So yeah, I'm the Mick that can speak Spanish. Watch out.
Existe el español de los libros, el español propio, pero también el español de la calle. So there's translated. That's for those of you that are like, what did you just say, Mike? There's I appreciate that. At least you did.
La mayoría fue en la calle. La mayoría.
Yep. There's exactly. There's street Spanish is what I just said for those of you in the chat that didn't quite catch that. And then there's the proper Spanish. And that's the thing that was tricky for me. That when I see proper Spanish, because I grew up, speaking street Spanish primarily, I'm like, what? It took me a little bit, but I got it because funny story, as a brief aside before we continue with your career in the private sector is I grew up with my late great grandmother, and I was, she came from Puerto Rico, very broken English, Puerto Rico, she would say, in her broken English. So I spoke it all the time with her when I was a toddler, went to school, lost it, picked it back up at 7 and 8. And it helped a lot because now, listen, I tell people all the time, now that I can speak both fluently, it can help you get a job. Oh, yeah. And listen, I'll be honest, it can help you with girls too. So if you're a guy, pick it up for those reasons. Job and girls, what other motivation could you need? So the private sector is tricky because after all this excitement in the NYPD, even if you're still doing security, even if you're still doing executive protection, which is exciting in its own right, it's not the same, and that's just a fact of it. So, and that could bring a guy down. It could bring you down emotionally. If that was the case with you, what helped you counteract that?
I think I was kind of okay with not being in a busy command on a 4 to 12 anymore. Some of that adrenaline rush stuff can be fun, but I was okay with moving to a different type of job demeanor. And I was more than ready for it at that point. 20 years, like I said, I was kind of burnt out of that stuff. I didn't want to chase people anymore. I didn't want to run upstairs and fight with people. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, all right, been there, done that. Now it's time to maybe use my brain. I went back to school, and I really threw myself into my corporate security roles, where I became very well versed in threat assessment. Went to Gavin DeBecker's Threat Assessment and Management Academy in California twice. Read every book I could on the subject, and did a lot of cases as a corporate security director of threatening and disturbing behavior and stalking and harassment of executives and anybody. And so I threw myself into learning that and becoming proficient in that. And I went back to school and I got my master's degree in public safety administration, and I was asked to teach. So I became an adjunct professor, and I created a couple of classes at the grad and undergrad level. And I really enjoyed that as well. So I found ways to use the things I had learned without having to do it on the street and rolling around with people. And I was fine with that. It was time to do something different. I could see how people have a hard time transitioning, and maybe it's because I wasn't just on patrol and then stopped. My role in the JTTF was very much an administrator's role. And so I was ready to leave that. But I was okay with not getting dirty and not working at midnight and not being shot at. I mean, these are little luxuries in life. I was okay.
Little, he says. Little.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, you work a sector car in the Bronx, you work a detective squad in the Bronx, and yeah, I can understand why somebody would prefer the peace and quiet. And you're not that I'm going to give away your exact location. You're not even in New York anymore. You're in a different part of the country, which I imagine might have been a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah, my first move away from New York in early '05 was to start a position as corporate security director for a Fortune 50 company that didn't have one, believe it or not, and it was based in Boise, Idaho. So in 2005, I packed up the wagon and moved from New York to Boise, Idaho, which I swear to God, I got off the plane and almost got right back on it. I looked around. It was like landing on the moon. I felt like Neil Armstrong. It's like one small step for man. Where the hell am I? It's mountains and it just was a different way to live. It was a great experience. I was there 2 years, but it was kind of a nice decompression. My kids enjoyed it too. People were very genuine. It was just a chance to see a different part of life. And at this point in my life, my kids don't regret it either, because they had a chance to do and see and feel. And they now know that they could move if they had to and adapt, and not just adapt, but thrive. So yeah, I moved away from the New York area, and there's life outside New York. There really is a lot of good places.
Oh, of course. New Haven, Connecticut.
Connecticut. Yeah.
Exactly, which is where I'm based, which I often joke, and I say this, I preface this by saying to all of you, I say this with love. It's a dump, but it's my dump, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love this dump. Born and raised here, and we have great pizza too, so that kind of balances things out. Of course.
You don't get great pizza in Boise, Idaho. I'll tell you that. Nothing against Boise. I'm telling you.
No, that's you ain't lying. So before I get to the rapid fire, the thing I did want to touch on, I mentioned the show quite a bit tonight. And for those of you that'll watch this later on YouTube or watching it live, if you go to the description box of this episode, I've linked the website, of course, and the podcast itself, if you want to find it. Gold Shields, 25 episodes in. I haven't heard the 25th episode yet. I saw the promo. I'm going to listen to it a little bit later. I love it. And I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here. I really do enjoy the show. You guys are doing a great job with it. You've hit the ground running. It's not easy to do, but you guys are doing a great job of it, like I said. So what made you and Tom want to team up and start such a great thing where it's not just New York cases, it's everyone from all over the country that you're profiling?
Well, thank you. That's high praise from you, because you have done an amazing job with Mike the New Haven. I mean, wow. 250 episodes, but the people you have on, the content, I've listened to most of them. I really enjoy your show. So it's an honor to be on it. But Gold Shields, Tom and I, we work together, as I said, in the JTTF and in the gang unit, and recently have been involved in a couple other business things. And one point, I think it was probably like December or something, he said something like, with all the people we know and the careers we've had, and we should have a podcast. He just said it like that. And I was like, all right. Next thing I know, we're starting to develop it. And it just kind of happened. Next thing I know, we're calling people up. You want to be on this? We're going to do this. And we're still kind of figuring out exactly the nuances of the format and the various ways we want to take the show. But we started out with a notion of doing true crime told by detectives and investigators who made the cases, giving you the behind the scenes backstage pass as to what it's like to work on this crazy of a case, or this long of a case, or this noteworthy of a case. And that's been fun. But we've also found we have a kind of an ulterior motive that's popped up, and it's really one we enjoy, which is, I'll call it the altruistic piece of the show, which is aligning ourselves with the organizations and people who are out there supporting the men and women of law enforcement during their careers and after, and making sure that they get the support they need, that attention is brought to what they're doing. Because our job, what we view it as, is when we use this platform, we want to take the public's opinion, and even if it's a small segment of the public, and it'll be very small, and let them see the professionalism, the commitment to the people they serve that goes into police work. The people behind the badge. It's not just the guy that pulled you over and gave you a ticket for speeding. You have no idea what goes into doing that job. And you need to hear it from people who've been through it, maybe to bring some respect back. In the last few years, the profession has been kicked around, and every now and then we deserve to get kicked. We're like anybody else, make mistakes as a professional. Let's clean it up. Let's get better. But when we're not wrong and we're constantly being beaten up, it's time to say time out. There needs to be voices like you provide on this show, voices to let people hear the character behind the people, the honor, the commitment, the dedication, the struggles, and the joys and victories. It's all in there. And it's a very full life in law enforcement, and it's really about service. So we try to highlight that. We try to align ourselves with organizations that are doing the right thing. helping people out. And so far, it's been just an incredible ride. We've met people we never thought we would have. We've been fortunate enough to get some guests. We're very blessed to have all of them so far, and we have more lined up. And I'd ask you to listen just because I think you might enjoy the content. The show is not about Tom and I. We very much make it about the guest, and that's what you do too, Mike, which I respect. Let them be heard. Let them show who they are to the audience. And so it's educational, it's entertaining, and we're trying to keep things positive.
No, it is. I mean, one of the earliest episodes was Chief Animo, who's a good friend of mine, and you know that told me right then and there, wow, if they can get Louis Anemone for one of the first episodes they've done, again, they're off and running. You haven't even hit 30 episodes yet. Commissioner Bratton's already been on some of the best episodes. You know, Randy Sutton, I'm a huge Cops fan, you know, and I watched the reruns a lot as a kid. I remember him from the Las Vegas episode. So it's funny because when you had him on, I had just watched a rerun where he was a sergeant at the time. So it was like 94, 95. Where the first segment of the episode is him getting the gun off the street. You know, a guy, a teenager, had 2 guns on him. And then he's on your show. And I didn't know that he had a stroke. I didn't know he had endured so much. But you did a great job of telling his story. And the other one is that the situation isn't funny, but the way she told the story was hilarious. Which is the officer who was shot, I believe, she was shot about 4 or 5 times, multiple times, which you would think, oh my God, that's awful. But guys, go back and listen to that episode because I almost peed my pants because the way she tells the story is hilarious.
She is the real deal. I just love her. Kimber, I never met her in person. We can't wait till we get a chance to meet her in person. But wow, Berkeley County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina, Kimber just shot 8 times, checking out a suspicious vehicle, twice in the face. Young girl, but the courage, the bravery, and the way she says it, like, I can't believe you shot me. She gets up all pissed off. And the way she tells the story is so captivating and so it just makes you a fan of hers, you know, and she's resilient. That's what we love too. She didn't quit the profession. She's committed to the profession. She got healed. She came back. She went through her struggles. She always will, but she loves serving her community and doing this job and helping people. And it's like, you know, these are the type of people we want the world to hear about. You know, there's great people out there riding around your area right now, protecting you. Get to know them, you know? Yeah,
absolutely. The part where, before I get to the rapid fire, the part where, thank goodness no one was home, because I lost it laughing, and I was cackling like a maniac. I sounded like the Joker. Was when she said, "Now I'm tasting my curly fries." Now I'm mad. When I tell you I lost it, Dan, that was hilarious because she had just eaten a meal. And then, you know, unfortunately, there's never a good time to get shot, but especially not after you eat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that is priceless. You're right. Yeah. You have to listen to that episode. She's wonderful. Wonderful.
You and Tom do a great job. Well, on that note, the time has really flown by. We'll end up as we always end. You know the show, so you know it's the rapid fire. And I know you're ready for it. So we'll jump right into it. And here you could say multiple if you don't have one. It's fine. The first one is funniest call you ever responded to.
Oh, had to be the guy stark naked on Broadway on a winter night, standing there holding his engorged member.
Well, that's interesting. You know, he was, at least, you know, he was warm. You know, he was thinking warm thoughts.
He wasn't feeling the cold. That was one for the books.
I can imagine. Joey Brooklyn, I see you in the chat. Hi, buddy. Thanks for tuning in. Second, most uplifting call you ever responded to.
Delivered a baby once that was really, really an uplifting feeling after it was done.
There you go.
I would say that the good Lord delivered the baby. I just happened to be there and provided a place for it to come out. But that was pretty uplifting. It psyched me. I was like, wow, that's really cool. You know, I was 21. I was a rookie, and I was like, I'm a part of something really cool. You know.
There you go. Joe Maliga in the chat. That's our running joke. He always asks me, you know, to any PD or FD guests I get on, did they ever deliver a baby? He asked me that question earlier. There you go, Joe. So that answers the question. Yes. I'm sure you're happy. Third, I mean, listen, you've done a lot of them, and you talked about one in Gold Shields. You talked about one tonight, which was the Kings Club case. But besides that one, is there another one that you're really proud of having solved?
Well, I did a RICO case when I was in OSID that involved White Tigers gang, and it was an international heroin pipeline from Thailand to a variety of people in America that I was lucky enough, along with my team, to tap into. And I ended up being, I had a chance to do undercover work on it in Southeast Asia, where I was ordering up millions of dollars worth of heroin and got the tapes. I was wearing a Nagra recording device. I thought I was going to get killed, me and my DEA partner, and it worked out great. Got everybody extradited. It was corrupt Hong Kong police involved in it. There was homicides. It was a big thing. It took 2 years, and I was pretty proud of that.
Oh, as you should be. Fourth, and if you can't pick one, like I said again, it's fine because you worked across multiple boroughs. But favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Oh, wow, there's a bunch. I gotta admit, PJ Clark's calls out to me sometimes just because of the iconic nature of it on 3rd Avenue. I refused to sell out, so that has a bit of a place in my heart, and I have some memories there with my uncle. Gosh, tough. I'll have to come back to that, to be honest with you. Donovan's in Woodside. I mean, that's where I'm from.
Oh, there you go. And listen, hometown, home cooking. Fifth and finally, if you can go back in time and give advice to a young version or younger version of yourself, what advice, of course, knowing what you know now, would you give a young Dan Murphy?
Save more. Take advantage of every opportunity to save for your future when you're younger. Don't put that off. I would say make sure you're well aware when you come into police work of what you might encounter in terms of people around you with motives that aren't pure. Because I ended up working around some folks who ended up getting in a lot of trouble, and they didn't do anything in front of me, and I'm glad. But I didn't recognize the signs. I was very naive when I first became a cop. I thought all of us were in it for the right reason, but I would have probably warned myself, just be careful. Stay away from this or that, and don't be afraid to let people know when you see something that's bad, because it's going to hurt everybody.
Oh, of course. And you just talked about that again with Laborio Luongo and the 3-0, and that was a great episode and I loved what he mentioned, that even though he did not want to talk to these guys at first, you disgraced the badge, you dishonored our profession, he wanted to at least better understand simply why. Because it's a heartbreaking thing to see someone take a job where you're supposed to be helping people, and you're no better than the people that you're supposed to be collaring. But I love that he went and did that and analyzed that a lot of cops didn't pay attention, as he discussed. They came in young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and they thought, oh, this is the way it is. If you could take a step back, as he warned from his experiences, and truly see the signs, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. And even if the precinct and the profession takes a beating, you could look yourself in the mirror and say, I know I'm doing the right thing, at least.
Mm-hmm. He's a great guy. Leo Longaro, I have so much respect for him. He was put in a very difficult situation, and the cops there needed him because he had experience, and he had courage, and he had leadership. So it was an honor to have him on the show. Yep,
Sergeant Longaro, of course, the author of a new book. Hopefully I can interview him at some point. Dan, before we go, stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. Any shout-outs to anyone, or besides Gold Shields, of course, any shout-outs to anyone or anything that you'd like to give?
Oh, everybody I ever worked with on a job. So many of you to name. You all left an incredible impression upon me. I had so much support, so much friendship, so much love from the men and women I served with in my career. I owe you all that. And in my post-NYPD career, I've met so many amazing people that to name them all here would be too much. My children, Daniel and Erin, and my grandchildren, of course, top of my list always. And my beautiful wife, Angela, who is incredible. And Tom Smith, my partner in crime right now. We're doing a bunch of stuff together. Couldn't ask for a better guy to go through the stuff we're going through and went through together. So.
And he's the real deal in his own right. 30 years, 17 at JTTF. He'll hopefully be on the show coming up in the fall. So Dan, this has been great. Like I said, stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. As always, a collective shout out to everyone. And I missed someone earlier. For those of you on YouTube, I appreciate you guys tuning in. But Eric Grimes was tuning in via LinkedIn, retired police officer, I believe, or detective rather. So Eric, I didn't mean to miss you. Thanks for tuning in. Everybody else, thank you as well. Guys, how much I appreciate you guys always tuning in. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, I chased this interview for a while, and it's funny because I work for the guy, so he's my boss, and he's camera shy, but we're going to bring him out of that on Friday. When the FDNY formed its Special Operations Command in 1998, he was a charter member of it, worked in Squad 288 in Queens, and later returned in 2009 as lieutenant. For volume 39 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, he's 1/3 of the popular fire service team Getting Salty Experience podcast. Lou Refrano will be here. That'll be Friday at 7. So tune in for that one. That should be another great one coming up on tap. Of course, in the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Sergeant Dan Murphy, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, stay safe, and have a great rest of your night, everyone. Take care. Bye.
you.